Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, it's one of the big ones. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Muse, titled Drones. There's no easy way to talk about Muse. I mean, fans of the band love them for their genre-pushing style, their incredible imagination, their technically potent melodic construction that's led to some fantastic songs, and Matt Bellamy's uniquely powerful voice, unlike any other. Non-fans hate them for their lyrical pretentiousness or outright absurdity, their self-serious appropriation of progressive, alternative, and arena rock tropes without getting the real substance behind it, their incredibly hyperbolic presentation up to 11 every single time, and Matt Bellamy's shameless caterwauling, especially his high falsetto range, which can get pretty grating. In other words, they tend to be a polarizing band, and unlike most, I tend to fall somewhere in the middle with them, in that they're not a bad band by any stretch of the mind, but they're definitely kind of uneven for me. The odd issue for me across their first 4 albums is that outside of a couple songs they have on every single album that are just goddamn amazing across the board, they tend to fall into an agreeable comfort zone that can start to run together a little bit. A very good sound, but some of the songs individually began not to stick out as much. That started to change around the mid-2000s with the broader embrace of styles and records like Black Holes and Revelations. But it's also where my opinion on Muse tends to get a little bit more mixed. Yes, I can appreciate the genre bending and the worship of progressive rock, and especially of Queen, but lyrically it often felt like Muse was just spiraling into a rabbit hole that was increasingly interestingly sketched but very incoherent, and the band took themselves way too damn seriously to realize any of it. In other words, it's the exact same path that so much progressive rock took in its heyday, especially around the tail end of the 70s. I mean, credit for Muse for always maintaining a distinctive sound in the face of going over the top in a half dozen different genres, but by the time we hit the second law, I worried I'd lose my ability to take the band remotely seriously, especially when they got political with the subtlety of a tactical airstrike. And on that topic, I can't tell you how skeptical I was about their upcoming record called Drones. On the one hand, I was a little bit fascinated that Muse was going for a back-to-basics approach of all things, but I wasn't exactly sure grabbing producer Mutt Lange, most known for producing albums like, say, AC/DC's Highway to Hell or The Cars' Heartbeat City, or just Shania Twain's Come On Over and Nickelback's Dark Horse, I'm not sure that producer was the best way to do it. And let's be blunt, Muse does not exactly do subtle or complex when it comes to their political material. And while I dug a lot of their populism, drone warfare, and modern geopolitics, kinda hard to boil down to anthems from monstrous live sets. But I had hopes. I like Muse as a band, so did they manage to pull it off? Well, to be blunt, no. They didn't pull this off. Now let me stress, I completely get why people like this album. For those of you who are sick of Muse hopping in genres with grand operatic flair and wanted to make something a little bit more gritty and serious and hardcore, they definitely delivered with Drones, and as such they made one of the most punishingly colorless and bleak records I've heard thus far this year. It's too ponderous to be any fun, and yet has nowhere near the intellectual heft to earn all of its gravitas and seriousness. Yes, there are some solid heavy grooves, and those have the chugging intensity you would expect from a modern Mutt Lange album, but beyond that, Drones is easily one of the least enjoyable albums that I've heard from Muse, and all the more evidence that Populist Swell is the only part of Muse's political material that manages to work at all. I'm not calling it an outright bad album, but it is a disappointment. But before we get to the massive elephant in the room that is the lyrics and themes, let's talk about instrumentation and production. And yeah, Muse wasn't kidding when they said they were going back to basics, because for the first half of this album, the symphonic swell and off-kilter musical ideas are completely gone in favor of chugging, monochromatic distorted guitars, blocky percussion, and oily synth lines and electronic flourishes straight from a late period Linkin Park album that certainly do evoke something of a military atmosphere, and it does help that Matt Bellamy can still write good guitar grooves that stick no matter how much they're just crushed into chunks that actually could use a little bit more fire in a Queens of the Stone Age sort of vein. And most of this is Mutt Lange's fault. I'm not blaming Muse. I can't blame Bellamy for the tone on Psycho that sounds like someone crossed Psychosis by Poets of the Fall and Burnt to the Ground by Nickelback, but decided to make it more staccato and damage all that roiling groove. But it's the same problem that hurts the first half of Dead Inside. They have no real momentum to them, at least until halfway through the track. And that doesn't take anything away from Bellamy's playing or some of the stronger bass lines, the skittering thrash-like riffs, and a great solo on Reapers. And that's them become a Guitar Hero staple. It would have kicked a lot more ass if Mutt Lange hadn't chopped the feedback and vocal samples to pieces and smeared this film of static over the damn thing to make it sound more industrial. And yet it's nowhere near clanking or monstrous enough in those grooves to build that real industrial swell. And you know what? There are other places where the actual musicianship is damn impressive. The riffing on the Handler, the bounce of the groove on Defector, the fusion of the Siren to the fuzzy groove on Revolt that tries to recapture capture some of the Queen-like bombast of earlier Muse records. Honestly wish we had more of that. But Mutt Lange's drowning the mix in feedback instead of picking a cleaner tone that actually has real muscle behind it strikes me as a complete misstep. Mostly because it only further de-emphasizes the melodies that are actually in the grooves. And I'll say it, for as much as I like Matt Blamey's vocals, he's got no room to breathe on this record thanks to all the rough-edge filters that are just piled on his voice. And his cleaner, more strident tones just doesn't match the guitars at all, which demand a singer with raw grit who can pull it off. I don't really like Chad Kroeger's voice, but he at least fits on Burn It to the Ground over Mutt Lange's production a fair bit better. You want proof of where Matt Blamey belongs? Look at the wedding song Waiting to Happen track Aftermath. One of the better songs on this album simply because it has more of a sense of melody thanks to the strings and the cleaner presentation. It sounds like a really good Muse song. It's destined to become a staple of Muse's live sets and will probably sound fantastic there. But then again, the choice to shove the guitar riff on top of the back half of the song strikes me as a really poor choice, and instead of giving the vocals more swell, well, I have that crowd-pleasing vibe. The Globalist, it turns out a lot better, probably the best song on the album. A 10-minute epic that begins with a lonely whistle, echoing guitars, and acoustic strums that recalls almost some spaghetti westerns that's damn near classic Muse in the vein of Knights of Sidonia, before diving into that titanic riffs, and ending with a well-executed piano outro. It's one of the few places where the heaviness works for me. And of course, there's the multi-part gospel reminiscent vocal harmony, the title track, that serves as an album closer, but it feels more like a tacked-on extra than anything. Really didn't do a lot for me there, gotta be honest. But you know what? Enough dancing around the issue here. Let's talk about lyrics and themes. And fair warning, this is where we're going to be getting into controversial territory surrounding international politics, so if you don't want to hear it, clear out now. Now, as the title suggests, this is a record surrounding the whole concept of drones and drone warfare, a hot-button topic in the United States right now. Let's put aside the whole issue that Muse is an English band sampling John F. Kennedy, and that the UK drone presence is far less substantial than that of the US, and focus more on the main issue, in that the usage of drones in warfare kinda complex. From a broad utilitarian point of view, they're significantly cheaper in both cash and human lives in eliminating the enemy, and that's a hands-off approach to killing terrorists that's proven very effective in keeping troops off of the ground in, say, Syria. And that's something that's hard to discount in the war on terror these days, a broadly mismanaged conflict that has roots in complex geopolitics going back at least 5 presidential administrations. It's not exactly easy here. On the other hand, drones are also a program that's dangerously low on oversight by the government, veiled in secrecy, has killed more than its fair share of innocents, and lends even more to the dehumanization of war. The point is, you really can't paint this conflict in black and white, especially in the Middle East right now, where there's no easy answer to problems like ISIS or the war on terror. And herein lies the reason why Muse's attempt at discussing drones doesn't work. It attempts to boil down the issues to such broad strokes that context goes completely out the window. You could have made a compelling concept album out of drones as a concept, as a theme. You could have gone more into the moral complexities and ambiguity surrounding that. But instead of asking the tough moral questions, Muse instead goes for broad slogans and the war is hell dehumanization, at using drones to add just this level of creeping inhumanity. And that's a huge problem when it comes to the tone. If you play everything completely straight in this vein, and you intentionally hammer on the drone dystopia of it all, your lack of nuance in the conversation becomes glaring and a huge problem, especially when drone warfare is still killing people today. And it's not just that it makes the appropriation of the drone issue feel clumsy and honestly kind of ignorant, but it feels boiled down to the same thematic strokes as every other half-formed industrial-inspired dystopian record I've ever heard. While I've got many issues with Nine Inch Nails' Year Zero and its commentary on the Iraq War, it at least tried for more ambiguity than this. Muse instead does the worst possible thing and wraps so much of their anti-drone rhetoric and conspiracy theory jargon that feels imported from your average free website made by a teenager who just read George Orwell's 1984 for the first time with zero self-awareness. And that's a problem for me taking any of this seriously, which is clear that Muse wants me to take this seriously. They consider this a big issue, but when you wrap it all in conspiracy theory nonsense, I find it even harder to buy into. And I say the whole teenage free website because the writing on this record is frequently flat out embarrassing. Now, people have already mobbed Dead Inside for reading like a mid-2000s emo track, and a bad one at that. But then there's Psycho that rings as so monumentally homoerotic, complete with lines like, "Your ass belongs to me now," that's borderline parody. Hell, I might have even bought it as some actual subtext in the military, but that would imply Muse is capable of subtlety, which is definitely not the case here. The one thing I do like lyrically on this album is the implication on some of the later songs that global citizenry will aid in breaking some of the dehumanization of drones as we come to be connected with each other all over the world. But again, it's placed in such broad strokes and wrapped in all that conspiracy theory nonsense that I have a hard time really buying into it. I'm sorry. So to summarize, I doubt that drones conceptually could have possibly worked coming from Muse, but it could have been better than this. Putting aside the lyrics, arguably the least important part of any Muse album, what I think hurts this album most is Mutt Lange's production. It's nowhere near as abrasive or heavy enough to be industrial or metal, yet too dour and monochromatic to be anything close to having real texture or God knows having any fun, yet too ponderous and jerky to have real potent grooves or a raging punk sensibility that it desperately wants. And the infuriating thing is, if I turn off my brain, kind of completely ignore the lyrics and just try to just rock out, there are moments where the instrumentation and musicianship is good enough for me to actually kind of enjoy a couple of these tracks. In other words, the only way I can enjoy drones is becoming a drone myself. And in celebration of that sick irony, this album gets a strong 5 out of 10 and only a recommendation for hardcore Muse fans. Otherwise, I'm sorry, I'd stay away from this. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can't imagine why this review will be complicated at all in the comment section. Just try to keep things civil. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with throwing some hate. I understand if you like it, but yeah, it did nothing for me. But if there's anything else you want me to cover going forward, or is there anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.